Hello and welcome to the Overview Effect podcast. I am your host, Dane Jordan, and with me, as always, Mr. Thomas Dunlap. How's it going,
Mrs.
Thomas?
Today it's Mrs.
Today it's
Thomas Dunlap.
Mrs.
That's
There we
right.
go. We support that, Thomas. We
That's
support
right.
it.
Exactly. More power to me.
We are on episode 8 now, and Thomas had something in the holster here he wanted to drop on us here right at the beginning. So go ahead, take it away.
And this is more just a continuation. I don't think it's a surprise for anybody that, Dane, outside of our kind of slotted times when we're doing our podcast, we have conversations through Messenger, through chat, other times where we hang back from episodes and kind of talk about various things. And thinking about kind of the great debates that we have, or the great conversations, the discourses, there has been something that I know you're extremely passionate about that you haven't brought up yet. And really, I think it's, if I'm thinking about trying to compare, it's hard to compare, other events or other topics that are kind of putting in the same kind of light, the same kind of context. But I'd say this one's pretty charged, very charged, probably. I would say it's the next great debate beyond when you think about abortion rights, gay marriage, all of this. But I want to kind of open it up, and I wanted to really get your thoughts on it. So, Dane, you've been a supporter for, I think it's over half a dozen years. You've been very vocal about your opinions with me about interspecies marriage. So I wanted to kind of start to break that down a little bit. I know that when the kind of whole Roe v. Wade thing was coming up, you brought it up, again and again. What about interspecies marriage? And I didn't really have a good sense of what that entails and what that means. Horse and a man. But yeah, open it up for me, Dane. So tell me all about it.
The basic underlying idea is like, if it has a heart, like I can have sex with it.
Yeah. Is that how that works, Dane?
Just trying to give my love, that's all it is. So luckily many mammals and species have hearts, so that's where I draw the line. That's about it.
And is there like, I kind of walk me into a little bit the psyche of it. I mean, how long have you known? So is this something that,
well, you can't love without a heart, right? That's science.
No, that's fair in terms of like that forming the opinion. But how did you even kind of stumble upon that?
It was an accident. Yeah, I was just kind of walking around on a farm one day, slipped.
It's too much. It's too much. It's too much. Oh, it's funnier than I thought it would.
And just one thing led to another. There's a patch of uneven ground, and there I was with Boris the hog, and it's like, wait, why is this not allowed? I don't understand.
Oh, I'm actually tearing up.
That's it, man. That's there's not a whole lot to it. It's a quick story.
Yeah, we'll have to. It's too hot, too charged for me, Dane.
It's
I can't go in.
It's cool. It's cool. It's a hot topic.
Growing up on a farm.
Yeah,
Yeah. I like that direction of you slipped. uh,
And
that
Boris,
was it.
yeah,
Boris.
Boris the Hog was there to support me in more ways than I could have ever imagined.
Now Boris, not to, I guess, not to be too presumptuous, but Boris is a male's name.
Mhm.
So the whole interspecies marriage. Let me understand the logistics of that a little bit more. Does it, like, if you kind of widen that, like, is there any restrictions in terms of male, female, uh, fuck me, human male?
I mean, if it's got a hole, that's pretty much the only criteria I need.
Uh, oh man, that's wicked. It's wicked good. Now, how does that work with abortion rights for? Start talking about abortions.
Well,
Interspecies.
it's a win-win, right? Because if they make anything as a result of it, there's dinner. It's like, sweet, we got some food.
I like the angle of going after like superhuman hybrids. Let's pivot, Dave. It's too much. I can't do it. It's too funny for me.
That was good. That was good. Nice.
That's too much. Yeah, I know. It's funny as shit. Man.
So
there's a lot you can go there.
Yeah. Up next in the queue, we're doing a little different flow of events here today on this episode. We got a couple topics here in the queue we are deciding to discuss. I believe up next is addiction, Thomas, and this is something Thomas came up with.
Oh, addiction. Oh, you're going right back into me. Okay, sorry. I'm still coming down from our story about Boris here. Yeah, let's fucking hard pivot here. Addiction. I don't know. What is that? Let's kind of open that up. What? I mean, there's kind of all degrees, and there's a gradient of addiction. There's things that I would even say are, I guess I could posit, that are positive in terms of addiction. In terms of things that you make kind
That's
of
a hot
habit
take.
daily. Yeah, I wonder how that. I'm just kind of letting my mind kind of wander here, but yeah, what's been your experience with addiction, Dane? Do you have anything that you'd want to share about that?
I mean, I'm gonna defer to I would say, eloquent statement made by Andrew Huberman, who's if I remember correctly, a neuroscientist at Harvard. Got pretty popular. He has his own podcast. Shout out to you, Dr. Huberman, talking about really, really cool topics in science. He is a neuroscientist, if I remember correctly, but talks about lots of realms of science. And I believe he has studied addiction, or if he doesn't directly study addiction, is in that realm and has defined addiction as the narrowing of, I think, goals, or to be a bit more abstract, things that bring one pleasure. It's like a narrowing of that, where it's like, oh, this is the only way I can get pleasure in life, is this subset of things. And I think that's pretty spot on, because you can put that in a drug context, you can put that in like a sex context rather. Yeah. And so, and I think it's a hot take. You said that there are things that you can benefit from being addicted to. And I don't know if that's true.
Yeah, I guess maybe anything, and I guess you go comes in our friend of moderation again. But I was just kind of contemplating: is there something? Is there a positive aspect to addiction, or I guess in the definition of itself, just like you were talking about, is if you're addicted to something, it starts to actually take control over control over your life.
Yeah, I mean, we could look at a benign one, which I think probably tens of millions, if not more, of Americans are addicted to, is like caffeine.
Yeah, that's actually a fair point.
To the point where, like, I can't function normally without it. I mean, it's relatively benign, I think, in the grand scale of things. There are some people who of course, are more addicted or require a larger intake of caffeine to, satisfy that urge. But that's still an addiction.
Do you think that the part of that definition though that starts to go outside that, because the power it holds over me? I mean, to be honest, if I really decided, Dane, you can't drink coffee today, you'd make it through the
Yep.
day. You might be grumpy, it might impact your mood, but it doesn't have that kind of control over you the same way I think about maybe drug use or something, where your actual body kind of goes into a point of kind of, is
Hmm.
catatonic, right? In terms of, so I guess we're kind of skirting with that, but I wonder if that it starts to be outside. Um, I don't know. Would you still classify that as addiction? You think?
Classify what?
Like, so coffee. Do you think
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
the
It
example?
has a
Yeah.
chemical active caffeine. Now decaf, like I would, if you're addicted to decaf caffeine, I mean, you could be addicted to anything. Anything.
Hmm.
There's you could be. I think a lot of it is something that results in a form of pleasure. Otherwise, I think it wouldn't really make sense to be addicted to it unless you have some other mental disorders. But
It's
yeah.
just I don't know if it's necessarily pleasure, right? I mean, just kind of unpacking that. I mean, I don't drink coffee. To be honest, I don't know if I necessarily drink coffee for pleasure, or at least that it's not on the surface. As far as when I'm
Hmm.
drinking coffee,
Hmm.
I'm going, yeah, this is pleasurable for me. I guess it's kind of buried underneath it, if I think about it.
Yeah, I mean, so it's but pleasure, but some sort of like beneficial outcome. I mean, so maybe you're not directly, but I would say I would actually almost argue that maybe you don't intentionally do it for pleasure, but there is a pleasurable
Hmm.
aspect or outcome of it as a result, right?
Hmm.
Something that you feel is good. I mean, pleasure is a bit of a large word, but I mean, if you want to drill down into the neurochemistry, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if, although the neurochemistry of caffeine is purely just is inhibiting the reuptake of adenosine. From my information, although I think it depends on the individual to a degree, there is some aspect of dopamine secretion involved with caffeine consumption. I need to double check that, my sources on that one, but if I remember correctly, there is a bit of that, which dopamine is very much a pleasure chemical, so there would be pleasure involved with that. I definitely feel a pleasurable, like I would say about 20 minutes after I ingest whatever dosage of caffeine. Like there's definitely like a buzz that is very pleasurable for me that is pretty short. It's only about 20 minutes or so, but it's essentially right when the caffeine hits. There's definitely like a
How do you?
there's well there's
Yeah, I don't get that
there's
anymore.
definitely, well, it's because you've been drinking it so much, so
Yeah.
frequently. Um, yeah, and so I abstained. I was actually good. I've been drinking caffeine for about a week now before my last abstention of probably 4 or 5 days. But even 4 or 5 days, like that will do a significant reduction in, or rather increase in your caffeine sensitivity. And I highly recommend it. You can definitely feel the thing with caffeine is it doesn't create energy, right? We've had this conversation before, Thomas, but if you think about chemically, like what it does, neurochemically what it does, you get energy from carbohydrates, right? Or from
Hmm.
um, glycogen stores in your muscles. Um, you don't, caffeine itself has very low caloric content. So you're not actually ingesting anything that's broken down that eventually results in, ATP forming ADP. And I forget the chemical reduce as a result of that, like the base energy reaction. Like that's not what is happening when you drink caffeine. You get your energy from food.
Well, let's. So I want to go back to the addiction could be good. Would you say that somebody who's working out every day, then they're I mean they're seeking that in pleasure, right? I know lots of people that actually enjoy physically exerting
Mm-hmm.
themselves. They enjoy what it does for them. Would you, if they're doing it daily and they make it part, they're setting aside time to do this every single day. And to be honest, if I think about the brain as input output,
Mm-hmm.
they are getting they're able to increase the what makes them feel good from exercising, especially after the fact. I'm sure they get a rush of dopamine and whatever else. Would you say that that's an addiction?
What of like living? No, I wouldn't,
Yeah, let's say.
because I feel an addiction. I mean, maybe in like a colloquial sense, like yeah, I'm addicted, to working out. People would understand what you're saying without having to take like a sort of legitimate or like I guess clinical sort of definition of the word addicted. But if we stick to like the clinical, that's like now if you, it's an interesting question. I guess it's a bit of a gray area, I guess, in my perception, because I am like I needed to exercise, but in the sense, in more so the sense that it's not that I can't function without exercise. It's that I know that my experience of day to day is subpar when I don't exercise. Like I don't feel as energized.
Yep.
I don't feel as, but that's like, yeah,
That's the coffee thing. I feel like I could say that just equally as well with coffee, with which we're both acknowledging that there's an aspect of addiction there. Like I agree with that in terms of, and it doesn't sound like it's too far removed in terms of if we just expand that and say, where do you draw the line of saying that it's addiction versus not addiction?
Well, I know for caffeine that if you stop, some people who are heavily addicted, I think a light addiction is benign. I think same with exercise. If you exercise frequently, but not every day, because you do need to give your body time to regenerate and recuperate. Um, it's benign, and yeah, I don't know. I think again, colloquially, the word addiction is definitely used more in a sort of derogatory sense, or more so a, if you're addicted to this. There's also, I guess, kind of like workaholic, like addicted to working. But
Yeah.
from my, yeah, I think it's safe to say colloquial. When you use the word addicted, it generally denotes a negative ramification of whatever the activity, or like whatever activity you're participating in, whether or not it's eating or drinking some sort of substance. But it doesn't have to be. And I think the broad picture, again, to jump back to Robert Huberman's, or rather Andrew Huberman's definition of just the narrowing of options of what brings one pleasure, is the actual definition. And so I would say that with caffeine, I wouldn't like, caffeine addiction to me is when you stop and you start getting migraine headaches, because
Hmm.
there is a side effect of drinking caffeine, that it dilates your blood vessels, which is actually why caffeine can be good for, and is in medicines such as Excedrin. It'll dilate your blood vessels and reduce headaches. So that's a side effect, that's beneficial. But yeah, I guess we would need to. I guess I could do it a little bit more digging clinically, but I would say short answer: yes, you could be addicted to good things. I mean, there's also the idea of like being addicted to sex. That's a very real thing that some people are.
Yeah.
Where now, as it sort of starts to, or like addicted to video games, like maybe something that doesn't have so much of a like hard negative like ramification physically, although some could be. So
And I think part of the definition that you're getting at that I'm starting to kind of suss out or want to pull out is that kind of that ability to kind of influence the actions you take or the control that you have. And so part of that addiction, or how I would view addiction, is, I think you said, narrowing of, what is it, in seeking of pleasure, or
yeah,
narrowing your options. But it's kind of that control it asserts over you in terms of saying that you've got to go down this direction.
yeah, because that's the only thing that you see. Your ability to see, I guess, to use the word in a broad sense, options or activities that will that you can derive some sort of pleasure benefit from, no longer exist. Like this is like to take the extreme example, like heroin addicts. They're like, I can't find anything in my life that gives me the same sort of pleasure as this drug gets me, so I want to take the drug. And that's what it is. This idea that
Right.
there's nothing else, has to be this drug.
And that's interesting in its own right. I won't get into heroin because I can't speak. I don't think that's a good one, or maybe the majority of people haven't had experiences. I don't know any of the data about that. But alcohol is actually a really good one for me as far as my background, or probably my first experience with alcohol was actually when my dad let me have. I don't know, because I was really interested. He had his 40, in the fridge. And okay, I want to try that. My dad drinks it. I want to drink some. Um, but I remember, I was like, fuck, this tastes fucking awful. That was my first reaction, or my first experience with alcohol, is thinking about how awful that tasted. And I didn't understand how my dad could drink it. And I would say that he definitely had a drinking problem in his life. He was functional, but it was something where I would say it started to kind of straddle that area of addiction where it was something right after work. He would drink until he was sufficiently intoxicated, and that would be his day, right? The end of his day. Which you can make an argument if you're functional, where's the line? Where do you draw the line? But I would say that it was kind of done in abuse when there would be probably different ways, especially as I've gotten older, where I'd say there's more healthy ways to cope with that. But why alcohol? Especially as I've gotten older, it really has no appeal for me. Um, I've never found any urge or desire to actually go say, "Hey, let me go have a beer. Let me go have uh, to want or to urge or to go after it." I've never gotten the sense of addiction from something like alcohol. Versus, we could take, pain pills. I've been on pain pills before, and that's a completely different experience for me. That was addictive. That was something that blew my mind in terms of the euphoria
What were the
that you could
pills?
you could get from that. This would have been, let's see, a Norco. I think it was Vicodins or Norcos, something like that. So opiates, and that right there, in terms of, and maybe this gets into some of the genetic differences, where maybe you're kind of at a disposition, or you're more genetically susceptible to it. But that I always thought was really interesting, because I've met people too that, they talk about their experiences with opiates, and they go, yeah, they fucking just wrecked my stomach, never want to take them again, I felt woozy, it was an awful experience. And so I reflect on that in terms of how life changing something like that can be when you first experience. And for me, I got a sense of maybe a degree of when people talk about addiction to alcohol, because I don't necessarily understand, being addicted to alcohol, but I could understand getting addicted to something like opiates because of how mind changing and bending and euphoric that experience
Yeah, there
was for
definitely
me.
is a genetic predisposition. That was a concern that my father had when he found out I was drinking, not drinking, but had drank at some point in high school at a I don't know if any specific party or just in general. I never did on any regular basis, but yeah, it there definitely is a genetic predisposition for individuals to have that would lead to a higher likelihood of addiction, and thus more caution needs to be exerted by those individuals. Um, but yeah,
And it's hard to, just like that, in terms of the just like trying to be careful about it. I remember, I think it was my mom was telling me a story that she had a friend uh, in college that she had spoken to, who actually struggled quite a bit with drinking. And the story goes that when they were talking about it, the man asked my mom. He goes, "Do you remember the first time you had a drink of alcohol?" And my mom, she doesn't really drink, but she says, "No, not really. I can't remember. Maybe I was X and so age at such and so event. Nothing specific though." And the man says, "I remember exactly where I was when I had my first drink." And just the impact of that, how that kind of resonated, like this was this life changing, something as simple as having a beer or whatever it was, this alcoholic beverage, was monumentous, was life changing for that individual. So I reflect
speaking
on
of
that.
alcohol, I actually just recently learned there's like a the headline was bombshell. I think that's wouldn't be too hyperbolic here, but they Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation found that any alcohol ingestion over 2 tablespoons of alcohol for anyone, yeah, it's something very small, for people under the age of 40 has no health benefits.
Doesn't that contradict the whole
Under
glass of
40.
wine a day or whatever it is, good for your heart? Okay, so after 40, you're good to go.
And this,
Hound it
yeah,
down.
and the study
Take
was, that's
stance.
super interesting. And the study has been conducted for, it's like in 205 different countries. So there's a plethora of data. It's not just this small backyard data sampling here. I think it's been going on for, if not decades, for years. And they just came to this conclusion. I think that's pretty dang crazy, because that is a huge, I mean, I always enjoy drinking a beer with friends and buddies every now and then. It's the common adjective is, or descriptor is, social lubricant, which I would definitely agree with to a degree. And yeah, it's fun. It's nice. There's a whole sort of subculture involved with it. There's lots of beers I enjoy. It's fun to kind of open up, get loose, and relax a little bit. But that definitely adds another layer on for me of, I guess, just this knowledge that, because to me it was always, if it was, in moderation it's fine, but now with that is, I don't know if I'll necessarily change too much. I don't drink all that much as it is right now. I mean, I don't really drink at all by myself, but
And I like that. That's another one of those words. Just like we're trying to suss out some of the nuance with the word addiction, is suss out what moderation means. I actually struggle with that when I start thinking about at what point do you go from moderation to something to where you'd say like, oh fuck, I guess I definitely went overboard here. And for me, I think about that a lot with kind of my dieting, my eating, what I'm doing in terms of doing that with moderation. But I could imagine for somebody that is that there's a pretty fine line between moderation to where you're actually starting to get into addiction.
yeah, I think moderation by definition means cyclical. You can't draw any sort of pattern in terms of the frequency of ingestion.
Mm. If I said like a cheat day once a week, in terms of, I would say, would you say that like if
That's
I'm
true.
eating, I have, I don't know, some, would you say that? I feel like
A
you and me,
minority
maybe
of the
it's the
time,
colloquial sense like you had brought up.
but even at
Yeah.
the time, yeah,
And that's kind of where I've kind of just
sure.
accepted that it's a subjective kind of term, and where I just kind of shake my head and go, oh, okay, I guess, I mean, that sounds, I'm not sure really where I would call it out and say, I don't think that's moderation, but yeah, because there's kind of
Yeah,
that
and it
gray
differs on the
area there.
individual too, because there are some who can tolerate much higher levels of whatever activity is going on and have no downside physically or emotionally, mentally, or any other lee. But yeah, it differs on the individual too. Like, for example, my mom is extremely sensitive to alcohol. It's like after you give her like one drink and she just kind of like throws off the whole poise. She's like, all right, cool, I took a drink. Like, I can I can be like completely unrestrained. And but yeah, she's just very sensitive. And for me now, I'd say like it's, my sensitivity has increased a lot, because I don't, my frequency of drinking has dropped a bunch. But 3 drinks, I would say, is where I start feeling the effects. One drink, I don't, maybe 2, like a little bit, but like 3 within a couple hours.
The other one that I never could get, or I never struggled with, even though that I I had some physical aspects of
Mm.
withdrawal from it, was smoking. I smoked for cigarettes for, I don't know, 4 or 5 years, and it was pretty heavy. Like I was doing about a half a pack a day. Like it kind of just built itself up. And just like you were talking about, and I kind of cringe at saying social lubricant. It feels a little funky saying that, but yeah, that was the
Mm.
idea with smoking, especially being in a band. You go do your rehearsal, you jam out, and then you go have a smoke break, right? And so that's where it started. And I remember the first few times having a cigarette, you get this awesome head rush, lightheadedness. It was great. And then it's a way to control the, when I'm going to relax, de-stress, I could have a cigarette, right? So it was kind of on demand. I could just kind of summon that. And it was, fairly easy to have a smoke whenever I wanted to have a smoke. But I remember, towards the end of that, my stint with smoking was
Oh,
I woke up coughing. I was kind of hacking stuff up, and I was like, "Oh, this is fucking gross, man. That's enough of that. That's definitely something I should kick." And there was, in terms of just like we talk about, kind of caffeine withdrawal addiction in that sense, but there was a sense of physical
oh yeah,
withdrawal, like where I could tell things were, yeah. But mentally, I was good with that. I had accepted that that's the decision I was going to make, that I was done and I could move on. And it wasn't anything that was hard for me to
that's
kick.
good. Well,
But then you have the flip side of that, where people will struggle. My dad's another example. He struggled his whole life with, I mean, he smoked since I would probably say in high school or something like that. And he struggled his whole life in terms of giving up smoking. Like, it was always there. It was always one of those demons that he had to kind of confront and face. And towards the end of his life, he was able to finally Nicorette gum, like nicotine gum, that ended up working out well for him. But yeah, it was always something that was there. It was hard to kind of understand too how much of a struggle this can be for somebody when it to yourself you just kind of look at it and go,
which
oh,
is
okay, I can stop
that
today.
brings up the idea of like companies that sort of produce these products. Like, to what degree do is there a responsibility for I mean, like for companies
Oh, I like that.
to take on their shoulders of like, hey, this is being abused. Like what sort of ethical responsibilities do heads of companies have in that regard? Like, is it unethical to build a like is the like there's a lot of controversy around like the Juuls. I don't know if you're familiar with Juuls. Yes. Yeah.
Juuls. Oh, the vape pens or something. I looked like I was tickling your balls.
I wish you did it like that, dude.
Vape pens. You're fucking, let me reach down, let me fucking, there you
But
go.
yeah,
Yeah.
there's a lot of controversy around that, especially because it added this degree of appeal, and I think it's left a permanent mark for sure on the younger generation. Probably Gen Z would be a safe, um, I guess segment or demographic to say has been affected likely the most by this. Although I don't have the hard numbers in front of me to justify that. But yeah, I mean, it's that was a big controversy. I know in California there were, I think, some bills.
And why was it a controversy though? Was it because they came out and they found some negative health
Yeah, well, it was
effects to it,
just
or what made it
the
controversial?
fact that I forget what the legality of it was, because it wasn't cigarettes. It was just this new sort of method of ingesting nicotine. So I can't recall right out of the gate whether or not there was a difference, because I believe now it's you have to be 21 if I'm not mistaken. I haven't bought any nicotine
Hmm.
stuff in really ever, so I don't know what the laws are for that. But I know it used to be 18 to smoke. Now it's 21. I don't know if that's across the country or if that's just California. But yeah, that was a big one for just the effect that it had on like appealing to this younger generation of like, oh, it's just the new way to smoke. And I got a friend of mine who's definitely pretty consistently uses, I don't know if it's a Juul specifically, but I definitely have friends who vape on a regular basis, and it seems to be this new sort of evolution of smoking because of its convenience. You don't need a lighter, all these different flavors. I think the flavor part of it too. I remember a friend of mine, we were just finished grabbing lunch. He's like, "Oh, you want to hit?" I was like, "Sure, whatever. Like, let's just see what these kids are up to these days." Yeah, and it tasted like not really a banana, like more of like what's like the a candy rendition of a banana, but it tasted delicious. And then, man, I got this ridiculous head buzz. I was like, "Holy crap!" I didn't even take a full inhale. I probably
Mm.
took like a third of an inhale. I was like, Jesus, this is insane. This is crazy. I was like, all right, I'm good. Like, I don't, I need to, I got plenty off that one. But yeah, I can see the appeal. And then actually, that's not true. He's like, his friend was like, oh, if you like that taste, you taste this one. I think it was like watermelon or something. Also, there's this like insanely delicious flavor, because you think of like smoking, it's just this, there's not a whole lot of flavor behind it. Go ahead.
And I just wanted to add, because that was actually, it was powerful for me in terms of one of the things that I was like, oh, maybe I would like to vape. Is this? I had this rich aroma, and I think it was vanilla something, and I just remember this rich vanilla smell that somebody had outside of. They were vaping outside, and I just kind of walked through it, and I was
Yep.
like, oh, it's delicious. That's delicious. And so just the way you're describing, I didn't get a sense of taste for it, but that exploitation of the senses and going, and I think this goes back to kind of the what responsibility do the corporations that have that produce this, that figure out ways to exploit our senses to make it as pleasurable as possible to
Like,
have
I
us
mean, I
be
imagine there's
consumers.
a like a large degree of lobbying going on in terms of like whether it should be illegal. But do you think there's a time in the future where, I mean, like, but it's hard to like where you draw the line, right? Because meat could be deadly, right? Food could be deadly.
Yeah, I think it's actually, I think it's the World Health Organization. There's something about meat in general where they say, I think it's like meat from cows. It's some semi carcinogenic or something like that. There's some classification, but yeah, drawing that line is difficult. And your question though, which let me give you just my off the top of my head responses. I don't necessarily put the corporations
You would say the
in the
government,
line of fire
it
in
falls in the
terms of the way
government's
that I think about
responsibility.
it. I think, yeah, I think that there's always something new that a corporation will try to exploit, and there's always a degree of that they're going to try to maximize profits, right? Whatever the industry is, that's part of capitalism. It's the foundation of it, and supply and demand. And so the idea that if government, that's where I think government should be coming in and putting regulation and control in place. And I'm sure that opens up a whole slew of problems, but that's kind of what I would look to as far as that's
I
who
got
I think bears the
yeah, I
responsibility,
agree. I agree with you on that
the
one.
brunt of it.
I think there may be some. I mean, to each their own in terms of what they want to pursue in regards to business endeavors. But personally, I think that would be difficult for me to get behind, knowing that its capability of misuse is very high, and I would say that. But that's again my personal take. I got a
As far as being
yeah,
involved
or
in a company like that
driving
or a
progress in
corporation
it
like that.
forward.
Yeah.
Just seeing I guess statistics hard to say. You can't really, and it's also very subjective. There's no statistics for like, oh man, I had a great night after I smoked that one cigarette because I met this person and then we got together and started dating. I've since kicked the habit, but had I not smoked the cigarette that one night, I wouldn't have met my wife. So I'm sure out there's just some sort of story like that where
Mm.
like a cigarette like was a transition, in which that sense
Oh
is
yeah.
like, you can't really necessarily call smoking bad. I think it has a high risk factor involved. Yeah. And would
Yeah.
generally advise, if not advise completely, to steer away from it because there are other ways to. And like, again, you don't have to bring the whole social thing back. Like, you don't have to be smoking to go outside, want to hang out with friends. You can just stand there and hang out.
That maturity, that mindset, it changed for me a lot in terms of as I gotten older, in terms of what are the things that I'm putting in my body that I don't necessarily need to be putting in my body, and just kind of thinking it minimalistically, like just from reducing kind of the variables of the things that do I want
Yeah.
to accept this is something I need to do day in and day out. And this actually leads into, there's all
Yeah,
sorts of
absolutely.
good that can come from that, asking that question, which is this really something financially as well, in terms of maybe something that you're spending on. That was one of the things that I always griped about, especially being in Alaska.
Mm.
Fucking
In
cigarette
Europe
tax is
too, like all
crazy,
the, I don't
man.
know if you've seen or been to
Like in
Europe,
terms
but
of what
the cartridges there, it basically has like smoking this, like you can't open the cartridge without ripping this label that says smoking kills, like just like directly on it.
and it's got a picture of somebody that's
Not a picture,
disfigured
just
from
like a
like
very large,
cancer or
like
something
there's
like
no
that,
way.
something awful.
Is it
Yeah.
has it gone that
No,
far? Oh, interesting.
there's a it's gone that far, yeah. And there's something to be said about being scared straight, because yeah,
Yeah.
you go, oh fuck, am I really doing this
We
to
were, I want
myself?
to pull back. We were talking about capitalism a bit, and I had this interesting idea. I was like, what if we had if we ever had Mr. Elon Musk on this podcast, like what questions would I want to ask this guy? Because we had talked about the idea. I think this was sort of after the credits of our last episode, of the idea that he brought up, which was really interesting. That kind of, you had to sit back and think about it, which the idea of like all interface is error. You remember that? I was like, that's an interesting thought. I mean, I think those thoughts like those don't really come into your head unless you need to apply them, I would say, in your day to day. It's not like if you're building a user interface or you're building a system that has a lot of interfaces, or you start analyzing interface as a whole and you're like, why does this interface need to happen? Is there a way not to interface? Is there a way to integrate the entire system under one hood? I feel like that's where the naturally those thought processes stem from, unless you're working in a field like that, and you have that sort of. But again, it speaks to the kind of problems that he's trying to solve. I was in his ability to break things down to core principles in terms of, like, for example, battery technology that they use in the cars. A lot of the, gosh, I'm gonna butcher the um, name of the components, but I forget. There's a specific component that involves, I think I don't know if it's the core. It might be a core of a battery cell, involves like a long winding, and that, yeah, and that involved like
I'm not sure.
a long route for electricity. It involved a lot of impedance because it was a very long winding. But typically that was how the industry had done it, and from my understanding that had been reinvented, that as opposed providing outlets on the top of the cell, so it wouldn't electricity wouldn't have to travel throughout the entire coil. It could travel directly straight up from the coil. I think the electrolytic cells, again, don't quote me on this,
Mm.
but reinventing this is how it's done, this is how battery cells are created. You have to coil, you have to wind it like this. He's like, well, do we have to, like, what if we can bring that? I think that mindset is extremely powerful, and I think that's where innovation is born, is where we question, like, do we have to do it this way? Why do we
Yeah.
have to do it this way? And really digging down into it. And so I kind of started thinking about that, just on the walk to the gym. So I was like, what I would ask, because I recently watched at least a small blurb of him in an interview talking about, like, someone asked whether or not he would want to step down as CEO of Tesla and be like COO or something. He's like, I'm not even CEO. I'm technically the techno king of Tesla, like, as an SEC filing. Like, these titles don't mean anything. It's just a piece of paper filed. And that's also what we discussed again in a bit in our last episode, in terms of what our business is, but just these pieces of paper, and probably not even printed. It's just like this storage on this device somewhere in a server room in this government. Like, that's a business right there. See those bits? That's a business. See all those bits flipped to one? Like, that's a business right there.
Mm.
Like, what is that? What a business even mean? These people just all agree it's just a social construct that we've created. And so I kind of was thinking, like, what was there? You talked about capitalism, which kind of raised that question, but the original thought, and we can get to capitalism, was, is there a better way of organizing people, or a more efficient way of organizing people to achieve a goal other than a business? It may look like a business. That's a question I would ask him. Like, is there a more efficient way? Because the idea of a business is something that's been around forever. And I guess the idea of a business in its sense is people working together to produce a good or service, and they have, they're paid, usually monetarily, as well as some other benefits, health. Like, is there a better way? And I don't know. I didn't really go down that thought process all too much, but that was just kind of an idea of, like, is business in its final form of evolution? Like, I feel like the idea of a business has been around. You can think of, like, he had a business back in the 1800s, and you can think, like, oh yeah, it's pretty much the same thing that it is today. Maybe the people are different, products a little different, the way they run the company is a little different, but is that the most efficient way of organizing people? And that, I think, it has changed, though, right? In terms of the ability of people to work. You don't no longer need to be physically in a location, right? And COVID caused a huge change in how business works, I think, irrevocably. Right now, there's people, you can work at a company that's headquartered on the other side of the globe, and you don't have to move anywhere. You can just open your laptop, and now you can start contributing. I think maybe the idea of a business, or the idea of the business won't change per se, because I think the idea of a business is morphing, in the sense of, like, what typically constitutes a business, because that constantly changes, but it's still a business. So I guess I answered kind of my own question. I would say the answer is, well, I don't know. I'd still be curious to hear his thoughts on that one. And so so that question in general is, like, is there a better way to do it?
Mm.
Like, are there better ways of government right now? Capitalism, by far, like the most efficient, effective form of government in the world. Is there a better way to run a country? Is there something like the next progression from capitalism to some other form of government? That was a question that came into mind when you said capitalism.
Do you think it's one of those things that'll be kind of it'll take the best parts from it,
Yeah, yeah,
and
absolutely.
not necessarily be something fundamentally different, but it'll still kind of take those pieces as it evolves kind of over time. I mean, there's plenty of downside too when you look at capitalism. I don't think
Yeah, let's
you're
talk
trying
about
to.
it. Yeah, yeah.
Oh, I was just thinking the one thing that I don't think capitalism solves for, or at least I don't think see how you can necessarily do it with capitalism, is where you have these huge when you have basically these huge upfront costs to kind of push the boundaries of science. And that's usually where there's kind of there's a limit there. There seems to be some kind of a limit where it's not enticing enough for capitalism to go after. And then you have people like Elon Musk that actually go, oh man, maybe I should rethink what I just said, because he's going after the space industry. And you wouldn't think necessarily this is something where capitalism is going to do hot with. But I was thinking about, Manhattan Project. These are examples of where government, has gotten involved, and it's not capitalistic in that sense, right? In terms of how it's being orchestrated and how it's ran. It's not based on consumers saying, let's go build some atomic, we need to buy atomic bombs. This
Was
is
that just
something
a
the government
government
mandated.
government funded?
Yeah. So just thinking about where kind of some of the limits are with capitalism, and there's also in a society that's ever increasing in terms of the ways that it wants to get entertainment and pleasure, that if you don't check or control capitalism, if you let it free reign,
Mm.
does it always go in the right direction, or is this where it's kind of this balance? And that's kind of where it seems like we've got kind of a hybrid system where we do influence control. We don't have It's not purely capitalistic because there's things you can and cannot do,
I think
right?
that's you're talking about like laissez-faire capitalism, right?
Oh, I'm not sure what educate me.
Yeah, laissez-faire translates from French roughly to like let be, like let capitalism do what capitalism can best, right? But that's where you run into the issues of like monopolies, where it's no longer in the consumer's interest to have capitalism because now they can the the monopoly, they can choke out competition and bring an inferior
Yeah.
market or inferior product to market. You see a lot of that with internet companies. That's what I've actually read, is that it's really really hard to start an internet company because they will just the sort of modus operandi is for these large companies to just bring in a shit ton of litigation and essentially sue them, whether or not they have any grounds. They still have to pay fees, legal fees, in order to defend themselves, and then just sue them into oblivion. Now they
Mm.
no longer fund them, and now they're on top, and then they have those funds because that's where they stand. So you see these problems like that. I would call that definitely a problem and a huge hurdle to overcome. I would say a pitfall of capitalism. But yeah, you talked about. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I was just going to say I had a thought, which was, what if the systems themselves, I mean, really what we've just pointed out with capitalism is kind of not necessarily a flaw with capitalism, maybe as it is in principle, but how it gets practically applied and left, to be. And then you put the factors of humans in place,
Hmm.
right? And so I was just thinking, as you evolve through time and society changes, thinking about, maybe you'll find out that the different types of government or economies, that they'll change, they'll be more applicable, or they will do better in those kind of environments through time. Maybe there isn't necessarily, you could say that there's one that would be most successful in a modern society like our point in time right now, but maybe we'd find out, if you fast forward a few hundred years based on how society has evolved, that this would be less successful.
Yeah, which is interesting. It makes me think like, if that's the case, like what would replace it? I think that there are really good things, and like like similar to how the design of the nuclear reactor in Chernobyl was flawed because it can fail, and there are fail-safe designs of nuclear reactors where if there are any sort of uh, like over, gosh, I'm gonna forget the terminology, but there's no, it's physically impossible for um, a runaway event to happen where things could go, because just the design of the nuclear reactor takes that possibility into, and it shuts itself down like physically, as opposed to needing to be shut down manually. Like it's built in that it'll shut itself down as a part of this. I wonder if there's something like that. I mean, maybe not a direct correlation into sort of like political structure, but you see that with capitalism. Like, what if capitalism, you take that paradigm, or you take that analogy, like capitalism is like a, whatever, the 1980s Chernobyl reactor, where if you just like let it rain and run in itself unfettered. Yeah.
Well, you have that example. I think you actually have that perfect example right now where you start talking about global warming,
Mm.
right? You have it. It's where there's significant interest in not having to actually dial back, the amount of emissions, companies are producing for good reason, right? They're focused on profit, right? At kind of the cost or the harm or the worsening of the global warming. And that's, I mean, we can show that pretty definitively that there's a correlation between, the amount of greenhouse gases and the warming, but how much are we actually doing about that? And more as time goes on, it becomes, more pressing. And I think we are, but that's an example of, I think, maybe a downside where you're looking at it from solely kind of a pure profit and not necessarily long-term interests for the species as a whole,
How
right?
could, yeah, so I guess how could we, like, what could we do to incentivize, like, right, because if they're doing it from a financial perspective, is there a way we can somehow financially, like, map this sort of global, and I think that's where kind of crypto comes into play and fills that gap a bit. I don't know all too much in that regard, but like coins, or I guess ETFs, that, I mean, that's ETFs, not being crypto, but this sort of idea, or like coin or financial benefit that a company would get when taking these things into consideration. So it's no longer like, hey, we're we're losing profit when we switch from plastic straws to paper straws.
Hmm.
It's just like, hey, we're actually gaining this aspect. We're gaining, a green token for every paper straw that we replace. Every plastic straw we replace with a paper straw, we get 0.001 green tokens that can then be leveraged in like a financial aspect. So it's now becomes beneficial for the company to take on these more green endeavors. How that mechanic would work would be a really interesting question to explore. But
Beneficial because I've made it as the governing body, that's overseeing for that country, that city, whatever it is, that I've made it beneficial for them, right?
interesting. So yeah, and so I guess that's probably, is that, you're kind of answering the question then, right? Like the government would have to create this sort of, I mean, and they do have that, right? There are like electric vehicle
Yeah,
subsidies, right, and
yeah.
like pollution subsidies. There's a lot of talk, or has been, at least in the last election, not last election, 2 elections ago, last election, no, 2 elections ago, before Trump. Feels like a whole different eon. Um, the idea of like a carbon tax, right? That's an idea that's come around. Um, yeah, so I guess it would require a government. So I mean, I feel like capitalism is like requires, or maybe not requires, but capitalism takes into account a government. You can't have a government without capitalism, or a capitalism without a government.
I mean, I think you can, right? There's kind of all these trade-offs, and especially where you could say that like there's an example of where we actually have. I wouldn't say this is necessarily opposed to the core values of capitalism, but you've got something where we're able to, I forget what it's called. It's where we nationalize all kind of the industries in the United States, where we're saying you need to go produce these strategic goods for our country. You need to stop what you're normally producing, and we want, like in World War II, right, where we had all the major automotive and airplane industries that were kind of switched over into kind of becoming war machines, right? do your part. So we kind of nationalize the or I forget what it is. There's some executive order where it basically just says, we're going to be focusing on this as a nation, and we're going to stop doing that. So, but in short bursts, in short bursts of asserting control, that seems reasonable for what we're trying to do as a country, right? But I could see the opposite, where you'd say that putting any control, especially a developing country, something that's developing, where maybe there's just kind of, let's just get something started, let's just actually get the ball rolling, where if you overregulate, I could see that also being problematic, because that assumes that you have kind of you're at a sufficient starting place to actually comply with that. You think about how the United States would have done in its infancy if there would have been another country saying, guys, you can't do this, look at kind of the emissions that you're producing, look how awful this will be for the world. How far back would that kind of set or deviate from what the original course was if you try to put down that legislation, that law, right then and there? So it almost seems like it needs to kind of evolve naturally or organically, that it kind of changes over time what those needs are. But I could see it being, you can easily kind of prevent capitalism from really working from overregulation, just as you could absolutely corrupt an entire country without regulation. But there might be good reasons where you'd want to start that way, to have really, dialed back regulations, and when things ramp up, then you start dialing it in.
So yeah, like to keep the thought experiment going, you talked about one of the pitfalls of capitalism being the reliance on government funding for scientific endeavors or pushing science forward. That's not entirely true. There are some private companies that are getting venture capital funding that are
in
taking on that.
If the sole goal is profit, because that's, let's face it, if you and I are going to run a business together, that one of our goals needs to be profit, right? We need to make sure that we're at least making money to support what our future endeavors are going to be. Maybe we've really dialed it in, and you or me are really focused on doing it the best way possible, but at the end of the day, for us to keep going, we have to make profit. And you have things in science where the cost is so high up front, or there is no known value that we are something that you're going to profit from. Like we talk about the Large Hadron Collider, where he discovered the Higgs boson, the God particle. Boom, boom, boom. But there's nothing profitable about that yet. We spent $14 billion, as far as the world coming together. There's nothing profitable where a corporation says, because we know that the Higgs boson is here and it has this energy level, and because we can say that our standard model is proven true, or we've made some really valid predictions. Look what I can produce now. It could just so happen, to be that what we find out from that information is something that, maybe makes it into everyday electronics or consumer devices, but there's no incentive for you and me to start a business to go after something like that if we want to be still in business the next year, because we would spend all our money not having any idea how we'd necessarily make profit. And so this is where government comes in. It has to take the brunt of that.
It doesn't have to be government though,
risk.
Right? It could be venture capital.
For you to get, you could just like for I'm sure for Elon Musk, he still has to have, as much as I truly believe what he wants to do is kind of an altruistic, like in terms of like he wants to make sure humanity has more than just this Earth. He wants to push the boundaries of exploration and space. Like he wants to see how far we can. I truly believe that he's got some guiding principles like that. It's not just all profit, but the fact is, to get people on board, like there's got to be some incentive. There's got to be a way to profitize it. There's got to be a way to actually get, year over year, to show that we're going to be able to make money from it.
So wait, I'm a bit confused here, because we started with the idea that funding scientific endeavors is very front heavy, which is a pitfall of capitalism. Did I summarize that correctly?
It's not necessarily a pitfall of it. I mean, I don't know if you want to look at it as a pitfall. It's just something that kind of gets where the focus of capitalism isn't necessarily aligned with pushing the frontier of science exploration. Like it's not necessarily aligned with that. It could just so happen to be that that's a byproduct of it, right? In terms of like, you look at what we can do with our smartphones. That's fucking amazing, right? This goes, you think about what they envisioned, the 1970s Star Trek. Like, we're well beyond that in terms of what we can do in terms of our wildest dreams. But for handheld devices, but you look at the example, especially as I lost my train of thought. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was gonna. I thought that. I mean that's been around for a long time. I feel like Columbus, was that not a capitalistic endeavor? I think I don't remember history off the top of my mind, but the king or queen of England at the time funded the exploration purely as a motive for finding more grounds for building, like making money, right?
Sure. There was a way that they saw to make profit. And that's what I'm getting at. When we're talking about the Large Hadron Collider, there isn't necessarily a way there's nobody that's saying this is how we're going to make profit from that.
Would you say that profit is a necessary metric of positive impact? Probably not. I'm going to pull that question back in. But you would say that there can be, not all the time, because plenty of companies can make profit maliciously or in not a ethical fashion. But would you say profit is, I guess, with the assumption that done ethically, is a metric of global good being done? Like if you're making a lot of money, clearly, as again with the assumption that it's done in an ethical manner, would you say like that is? I mean, that's definitely subjective, but I'm just trying to tease apart here, and I'm not really necessarily any taking sides per se, just more so kind of teasing this idea and kind of digging into it a bit.
Ask it more concisely for me.
So
Question.
Let me pull it back. So you said it's not a pitfall that
It's just different interests, right? In terms of what kind of the capitalism, if I think about what the end goal is, like it's not necessarily to push the understanding of space and exploration, the sciences, right? It's not necessarily
but
to
it
push
can
that.
be, on the flip side, can be leveraged.
It can be, yeah, and that's what I'm kind of getting at is anything where we talk about the replacing capitalism or too much government control. There's parts there's integral pieces where we'd say, oh yeah, if we're going to build a new system ground up, we want to definitely take some aspect of that profit, being driven and motivated to do something like that's. And to be honest, the fact is, if I'm going to put in my I'm going to make this my life's work, it's reasonable to assume that the people that are also making this their life work want to be compensated appropriately for that. They're not just going to, and I would be, I'm not just going to commit my life to do something to go kind of just live at poverty, at the poverty line. I wouldn't do that, right? I want to push beyond that. And so I can see how profits are important, right? So I think it's kind of, it requires, I can see how capitalism provides for lots of great things can come out of that. But I can also see where maybe it's going to turn a blind eye or not necessarily put focus on.
Okay. So I think we're both on the same page that with that regard, like it can be leveraged, but isn't a primary concern. Is there anything, this is again pretty subjective, but is there anything that can be argued or perhaps be more, fundamentally agreed upon as a flaw of capitalism across the board? So I think like maybe not a flaw. I think flaw is too strong of a word. That we're both on the same page with that.
Yeah, I don't necessarily. Yeah, it's not a flaw. It's just not in the. It's not in the focus. It's not in. If I think about the lens of what's kind of magnified or what capitalism goes after or tries to achieve, it's not necessarily the development and pushing the frontier of science and understanding of our place in the universe, right?
Yeah, I think that it would then fall on the responsibility of the leaders of the effort to weave capitalistic ideas and mechanics into their endeavor. We're like, all right, for example, like Neuralink, right? They're like, okay, let's create this like brain interface, But first, like, let's solve this whole paralysis thing. Like, let's like actually help people out on Earth so we can sell a product right now, as opposed to this very lofty, ambitious goal of, you know, essentially dissolving the speech interface.
Oh, and then you have this beautiful fusion, if I can use that, which is you have where you've got what's, ultimately, wouldn't it be great? I guess we can probably go into a dystopia, but let's say that we could cure cancer, right? Or we could have people live another 50 years. Let's do that. Let's say that we can slow down aging, right? How profitable that would be, maybe for the companies, especially that develop that kind of technology. It's pill, I don't know, whatever it would be. Neuralink, sure, we could talk about that too, but that you could have kind of this fusion where what's ultimately best for the individual could be aligned with profit as well. The problem, though, is that you have so much momentum and velocity. It's easy for something like that to kind of, I guess, to be corrupted or to go down maybe a path you weren't initially thinking. But I like
I
to.
was just gonna say, you kind of lost me there in the sense that what a company that would cure cancer could take a malicious turn.
Yeah. So, I mean, it gets back to, well, now I have a monopoly. You have to have my drug if you want to do, I'm going to charge whatever I want to charge. I'm the only one that understands this technology or has all the patents towards everything. Patents are this double-edged sword too, right? Where you say, like, fundamentally, science should be shared. Every bit of science. There shouldn't be secrets. There shouldn't be anything like that. But then at the same time, for the people that spend their whole life developing or working through something that have these great ideas, shouldn't they be rewarded? Shouldn't they be able to claim success? So it's this double-edged sword. So anyways, I can see where, if I play it out, you can run into some scenarios that would not be, of everyone's best interests. But Neuralink, I think, is a really great example where I get so excited thinking about this brain interface where you can say, you kind of force our own evolution, so to speak. Would you still call us Homo sapiens? Sure, you probably would. But the idea that you have this physical modification of an AI integrated into your brain that you could just summon at will.
But yeah, again, they have to solve real world problems right now in order to establish some sort of revenue stream, right? They can't just be building these toys essentially for the uber wealthy to have fun playing around with, assuming it would be an expensive product. But yeah, they got some ground to cover first before they get out there.
Do you know where they're at with that, by the way, as far as what kind of progress they've made? The last I remember is the monkey playing Pong.
Was that right?
They had some Neuralink interface, and there was a monkey that was just and he's having a great time too, because he's getting fed snacks and he's got this Neuralink hooked up and he's just playing Pong with his mind.
That's pretty sweet.
It's pretty sweet.
Yeah, I haven't checked in. I think the last update I heard from them just had to do more so with the hardware than the software. Just the size of the strands. I think the entire device is somewhere around the size of a quarter, which is pretty crazy. It just sits on the head and have a surgical procedure to embed these essentially these wires into your brain, very very fine, into very specific points. And yeah, so not sure on that one. I still want to circle back though, because I feel like there may be more in terms of things like pitfalls of like pretty blatantly obvious pitfalls of capitalism that aren't just from someone upset that money is needed to make more money to a degree, but like a real like oversight that can't that maybe could be out, it could be solved in the next release of Capitalism, to take like a software paradigm.
Capitalism
Yeah.
2.0. Hot patch. Well, what about your thoughts on that? Is there something where you're thinking about right now where you say like, fuck, dude, that is a really big shortcoming?
Well, I feel like there are some ideas kind of like in the further left of center realm of terms of like wealth accumulation, in terms of like this sort of like runaway wealth. I don't necessarily have an opinion one way or another, but that is an idea that has come up, is that,
Yeah.
these players rise extremely rapidly, and then wealth is vastly accumulated in a small percentage of people. um I can kind of see both. I mean, I understand that. I mean, what would be the solution to that? Like slowing one's progress, or you're like, hey, like you guys are doing too well, like stop doing too well, right? If you take that sort of angle. But I also, appreciate the fact of like the wealth disparity in the United States has like massively skewed in the last like 40 years in terms of the distribution of wealth. And I think part of that has to do with just the explosiveness of innovation in our era. I think a large part of that has to do with just new technology being leveraged and creating these like outstanding like growth. Like, where in the past, a lot of invention was very mechanical. You had to move physical things from one location to another and assemble them in some sort of manner in order for a product to make it to market. But that's not the case anymore. You can open your laptop, press a number of buttons in a very special order, and now boom, you're a millionaire, billionaire. Add, do add,
Mm.
a couple years of pressing those buttons in a very special order, and get the sequence of lights on the panel to glow in the right way. But you don't need to. So I think the span or the ability to innovate, like especially like software, right? It's a huge, I mean, huge global force. Just the ability, you don't have to be anywhere physically to create this product and bring in lots of money. I think that's huge, and I think part of that has led to, I no, I don't think, I know that has absolutely led to a lot of this. I think it's caused, to say how much it's caused in terms of the sort of wealth distribution is hard to say for sure. If it's like software, I don't know. I don't think it's entirely true statement to say software caused wealth inequality at its current state today. Like I don't know if you want to use the word degradation, but just more so the dispersion of wealth towards the higher percentile. It's definitely shifted away from the middle class up towards the upper class. Is solved
That's
entirely
and
from
that's
software, but
that's a continuing trend though, right? Like if you look, is it exponential? Like if I actually look through that over
mhm.
time, it ends up shooting up, especially in some places like the United States as
Yeah,
well.
I think it started after. Gosh, I was reading a bit about this, and I was trying to remember the trend, but it was definitely a lot more. And actually, I'm just started reading Homo Deus, which is by Yuval Noah Harari. Is, I think, the sequel to the book *Sapiens*. Homo Deus meaning like, as opposed to Homo sapiens, like Homo Deus meaning God, like people of God.
Well, this is the one I recommended. This
Oh,
one.
did you?
This is a while ago. Yeah, this is
Cool,
a
cool.
while ago. I actually really enjoyed
Oh,
it.
nice. Yeah. So he talks about that. Like, we no longer are like physical goods the metric of like wealth and power. Right now, it's knowledge. Like, knowledge is power, and that's true. And like, maybe this access, although we have the internet, so painting that argument as the cause of the shifting of wealth distribution is hard to say, because everyone has pretty much, with the internet today, has the access to the same information. I mean, sure, there's a bit of gating going on in some communities, but I would find that a bit of a pretty like a hard argument to justify in terms of the access of information being gated to the elite as being a cause of the wealth distribution uh changing.
Yeah, there's something personally hard to like. I get behind the idea. Like, I actually don't have necessarily any issues with companies making at face value. If I ask myself, is it wrong that companies can make billions of dollars? Do I have an issue with that? I go, no. That's what it is. You have IP. You had good leadership. All these different factors that allow you to do that year over year. You look at companies like Apple, Facebook, all the tech companies like and it I imagine it does. We see a lot of benefit from that in the United States, where that wealth kind of gets distributed and moved around. Like, I imagine there's definitely an effect of that. But man, it is hard when you see people like Jeff Bezos, who are first trillionaire.
No, I don't think he's a trillionaire yet, but he has
Oh,
some amount of money, I think.
it's it as soon as you take the company out and you say that one individual has this much wealth, and
Hundreds of
this is part
billions,
where it's
so
in
yeah.
hundreds of billions. This is a part where it's inconsistent for me, where I go, oh, that's fine, the company makes that much money, this is the goods, the services they provide. But to say an individual has that much, it's like, fuck, am I really okay with that? Is that and I kind of get, I guess there's a little bit of like cognitive dissonance where I kind of disagree with myself. It's hard for me to kind of get to one side of it, because there's parts of it where I say, well, yeah, this is their hard work, this is their effort, this is their way that they figured out how to actually, navigate this world and make it profitable for them. Like, but yeah, I don't think anybody. I think most people, when they hear it, kind of makes you feel sick when you hear about somebody having, $500 billion, or that they're being their net
On the
worth.
plus side,
It's hard to get.
you have foundations like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which
Mm.
I couldn't say I would be able to find anyone on the earth. Actually, I ran that back a little bit, but I would say, all intents and purposes, extremely altruistic. Their goal is to like eradicate polio, which I think they've done. They had a really great, mini series on Netflix about with all the work that they're doing. I think Bill Gates in general, but also the work that they're doing at Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and that's directly an outcome of this. I don't know if he's quite this a centi billionaire, but deca billionaire, right? He's got tens of billions of dollars to do stuff with. He's like, sweet, I'm gonna solve all these world problems, right? And you're like, damn, that's fucking sick. That is fucking awesome.
But this, compared to the like the state of things, the current state of affairs, I agree. But you wonder what you would do in that situation, because I go, there's only so much, and you and me talked about, there's only so much happiness you can get it's diminishing
Yeah,
returns. There's at some point you're not getting any more benefit. So is it really that philanthropic or altruistic for somebody to say, I've got billions of dollars, let me go put it elsewhere and do good for humanity? Because I go, wouldn't you just naturally come to that conclusion? Shouldn't you just naturally get there? Wouldn't I? And I hope I would. I mean, that's easy to say being on this side. I say, oh, sure, if I have excess, but it doesn't seem like anything that I say is that. Just right now I go, look at you, what a great example of a human you are, doing something like this. I kind of almost look at it the inverse way. I say, it's your fucking obligation,
that's
man.
true.
And I mean, fair enough if you want to draw a counterpoint to that, but it's kind of hard for me just to accept that, it's some great thing that they're doing when they have that much of something.
Interesting. So you're saying it is an obligation, or would you say then that the lack of,
You,
or would you say that? I mean, I don't know, maybe a bit of an argument, but would you say that Jeff Bezos, for example, is like not fulfilling an obligation that he has for having so much wealth?
I don't know specifically what he's involved with, and anything where it sounds like I'm getting to pass judgment is probably not the right system. Where Lord Thomas gets to say that this is, you're making good use of it. It's fair to raise the question though, which is it really that great of a deed that they're doing? Or I look at it, and to be consistent, I look at it the same way when you've got truly gifted individuals with intelligence. It's a gift and a burden that you carry with you, which is, if you're one of these individuals that has IQ that's off the radar, isn't it your responsibility don't you have a responsibility to help push the envelope in your respective field because of your intelligence? Is that something that you bear the cost because you're so far beyond average, that you're able to look at the world in a unique way? Do you think that, and I guess I kind of raise it as a
I
question,
think that
do you
yeah,
think,
that would run contrary to like more Zen principles, like Zen and Buddhist philosophies, where you have this like obligation. You're born in debt to society that you must fulfill, which to some degree you do, because you have to make money in order to survive, right? You have to do something in order to be able to provide for yourself. So just from like an economic perspective, that's true to a degree.
would you hold the individual in a different standard? Like, so let's take Einstein. Let's say that he really is somebody. Let's say that you're born today, and you're able to kind of see his life, and he's got, I forget what his IQ is, but anyways, it's something ridiculous. Where was 100 and you'll look it up for me. A very high IQ. And you found out he didn't apply to himself, and he somehow just ended up working maybe at some very entry level job for the rest of his life. Do you think that would be a waste of his abilities? And I'd say, yeah, probably. But at the same time, I accept do what makes you happy, right? There's kind of that humanistic aspect of it where I want you to be, do the things that make you happy. But there's the contradiction there, which is you do have some obligation to use those kind of gifts at the species level, the human level. Like you should be applying yourself.
Yeah, I guess my own personal take on it I would obviously very much support, and I guess to the best of my ability, chide the individual into pursuing those endeavors. But I don't know per se. I guess degree depends a bit on the degree of the relationship that I have with that individual. That it is obligation. I don't know if I would take the word obligation. I don't know if I would use that word, but I would absolutely support and try to inspire the individual in order to find that direction as one that is rewarding. That I would definitely, that's the approach I personally would take. I wouldn't sort of come down from this sort of moral grandstanding perspective of like, wow, look at you got to do this. It would just, for me personally, my personal take would be like, hey, look at all the things you could do. Like, wow, imagine a world where this is gone. Like, that's pretty fucking sick if you ask me. You can do it. You can do it. You absolutely have that. And like spark that flame within themselves. Now they take the direction, as opposed to me saying like, blowing a whistle, like, hey, like being the police, the traffic cop. Like, come on, keep it moving. Like, this is, you see, there's a subtle distinction there. But that's just a personal, like the personal take I would do it. I would just definitely try to inspire, but respect the decision that they make. Although I may not make the same one, I wouldn't, knowing that I'm not the same person. They have different, morals, different ethics. Respect that the fact that they made a decision that's not harming anyone. They're not harming anyone. They're not infringing upon
Yeah.
anyone else's ability to live. Maybe if they did act, it would help others. But I don't necessarily. I wouldn't condemn an individual for not helping someone else because that is their decision too. I would say, I mean, maybe depending on the situation, it could be like, wait, why? Like, I would be confused and not agree with the, if like someone's dying, like could have put out a hand and it was like an easy effort. Then I disagree with that per se, but I would still, if they had some sort of justification that was again ethical, it's hard to. Again, it's all pretty subjective territory, but
I'll let you. I'll do the. Was it? I'll do a reflection real quick, and then I think we're probably going to wrap it up. But if I hold up a mirror to myself and say, do I have an obligation to, beyond myself, to society, to be productive, whatever? And I'm going to use some, in its abstract sense, to be an upstanding, member of society, to do good where I can do good, to do the best of my abilities. If I look at that and I hold that up to myself, I say, yes, there is a degree of that, like that's there. I'm not obligation free. The fact is that this world is not my world, right? I share it with the rest of you, so I can't just fuck it up for everybody. So I think I do carry some aspect of that for myself. If I hold up a mirror, I say that there is an obligation that every one of us has. I guess I should just refer to myself. There's an obligation that I have in terms of how I should live my life in a way that maximizes, so to speak, the good that I can do beyond just me, myself. And I know that it gets into kind of like the esoteric, like what do you
semantics.
mean by good? Fair enough. Semantics of it. Yeah. Like what do you, how do you know that you're doing good? I get all that, but just saying that, is there an obligation that I feel that I have in that regard? I'd say, yeah. And I could only imagine that the more that I was able to realize or recognize if I truly had some unique gift or ability where, you know, the vast majority of humanity doesn't have, whether it be physical, monetary, or genetically, like I would assume that drive or that voice says you have a higher obligation. Whether or not it should be, I would imagine for myself personally that would be there.
All right, we'll leave it on that, and leave that for the viewers to think and ponder for themselves. We'll wrap it up there, folks. Thanks for tuning in, and hopefully we'll see you on the next one. Take care.